If you've never made tamales before, consider this your step-by-step video guide to how to make tamales. Tamales can seem a little bit overwhelming, especially if you've never made them before, but really once you start to break it down step by step, it's not as hard as you may think. Tamales are some of my favorite food, and they're pretty perfect because they're a little bit indulgent, but at the same time not too filling, and really, in my opinion, they can be eaten for almost anything, for your main course, for an appetizer, even for a snack maybe. Today we're going to be making tamales using our Instant Pot. So they are Instant Pot spicy chicken tamales. They have some anaheim peppers in it, or if you can't find those, you can substitute with poblano peppers or even use a mix of both. They're so good. Tamales have been around for thousands of years, which means there are hundreds and hundreds of varieties of flavors out there. Each family, state, and region kind of have their own traditions and methods for making tamales. Now, tamales are made for special occasions like Christmas or Day of the Dead, but they're also considered a street food, which makes them a great grab-and-go option. And just so you know the correct terminology before we get started, I know I don't always say it right or use it right, so ignore what I'm saying in the video. This is the correct terminology. If you're talking about one tamale, it's actually called a tamal. And if you're talking about multiple tamales, that's where you can say tamales. Also, if you are hosting a party for your friends and families where you guys get together and you make tamales, they call that a tamalada. So let's jump in and get started, and I want to walk you through everything step by step. So step one is making your masa. And the masa is the outside tender, flaky, almost like a crust, if you will, that keeps all of the filling inside. The key to a good masa is light, tender, and fluffy. Some people make their masa by hand, meaning they will grind their own corn. But for this recipe, we're gonna use pre-ground masa harina, which you can just buy at the grocery store and it's already made for you. In addition to your instant masa flour, you'll also need a couple other ingredients, including salt, baking soda, chicken broth, and lard. If you can find a local Mexican or international grocery store near you, I would suggest going there and finding all these products. They're gonna be a lot cheaper. However, if that's not available to you, I will link some of these products in the description below with links to Amazon so you can buy them. The lard plays a really important role in making your tamales light and fluffy and having that tender crust that you're looking for. You can think of this almost as adding butter to your flaky pie crust to help make it taste nice and rich and flaky. So first things first, you will need to add the lard to either a stand mixer fitted with your paddle attachment, or if you don't have a stand mixer, a hand mixer will work fine, but it's really crucial to use this so that way you make sure, especially for the first time, that you are getting your lard whipped enough so it's nice and fluffy. You're actually gonna whip your lard for about 4 minutes, and throughout this process, do not cut it short because cutting it short will leave you with a less superior product. After you've let your lard beat on medium speed for about 4 minutes, then you're going to, in a separate bowl, mix together your masa harina, your salt, and your baking powder. From there, you can start adding about 1/3 of the masa combination that we just made to the lard, and then you'll also want to alternate that with your chicken broth. Again, I use about 1/3 of the chicken broth and just slowly stream in that broth. You'll keep doing that same pattern, going back and forth until all of your masa and all of your chicken broth is done and incorporated with the lard. Once it's all combined, I like to let it beat for another 2 minutes on medium speed just to make sure everything's fully incorporated and it's gonna be nice, light, and fluffy. Now we're looking for a certain texture for your masa. So some people say it resembles like a smooth peanut butter, others say maybe like a hummus. It is still a dough, so you don't want it too wet, but you also don't want it too thick or it won't spread. The way you can check that it's the perfect consistency is by grabbing a warm glass of water, and you only need about 1/2 teaspoon of your masa. You kind of roll it into a little bit of a ball and then you drop it in the water. If it floats, once you know that your masa is ready, it's good to go and it's the perfect consistency. If it sinks to the bottom, you need to work on it a little bit. Most likely your problem is that you don't have enough lard in the mixture or your lard isn't whipped up enough. So what I like to do is add about a tablespoon more of your lard to your mixture and allow it to beat for an additional 2 minutes. Then you can redo that float test and see what you get. If at any point throughout this process your masa looks too dry, add only a tablespoon of chicken broth at a time to get it a little bit less dry and see if that fixes it. Moving along to step 2, which is an easy one to check off of your to-do list, is soaking our corn husks. The corn husks are an essential part of tamales and they're basically what we're gonna build our whole tamale on. To get the corn husks prepared, all you need is a large pot and some warm water. Fill the large pot with your corn husks and some warm water and allow the corn husks to soak for about an hour until they become pliable. You can always soak them for longer, but the problem comes if you soak them for too short of a time and they're not easily pliable and able to wrap your tamales in. Make sure to plan ahead, and if you need additional time soaking, to give it that time so that way you end up with the best product possible. As you fill your pot, you may notice some random corn fibers or dirt or dust on your corn husks. Don't worry about that, just still allow them to submerge, and then once they're done being submerged for at least an hour or until they're pliable, you can then rinse off all those extra fibers, dirt, and dust so you're left with a clean corn husk. Up next, we're at step 3, which is creating our filling, or in this case, cooking our chicken in the Instant Pot. When it comes to tamale fillings, you can use hundreds of different options, kind of depending on your mood or what you're feeling like that day. For our recipe today, we're going to be using chicken breasts along with anaheim peppers and poblano peppers. Depending on your personal taste preference or what you can find in your grocery store, you can use either just anaheim peppers, just poblano peppers, or a mix of both, which is my personal favorite. The poblano adds a smoky taste while the anaheim kind of kicks a little bit more of the heat. The best part about this filling is that it comes together in under 25 minutes, and not only are we cooking our chicken during this process, but we're also steaming our peppers and all the things that are going to fill our sauce up. For this step, go ahead and pull out your Instant Pot, and then you'll also need your steamer trivet, and this is going to help to make sure that our chicken is not boiled in the liquid, but rather it's steamed and it stays nice and juicy. First, place that trivet in the bottom of your Instant Pot along with 1 cup of chicken broth. Then carefully lay your chicken on top of the trivet along with sprinkling it with salt, adding your chipotle peppers and the anaheim peppers, onion, garlic, and bay leaves. Once everything's in there, close the Instant Pot lid and make sure the valve is set to sealing. Then you're going to push the manual pressure cook button and set a timer for 15 minutes. After your chicken is done cooking, allow it to naturally vent for about 10 minutes, so no need to do anything, just after it's done, set a timer for 10 minutes. Once you get to this point, we're going to do 2 separate tasks. So first things first, you need to take out all of the peppers, the onion, the garlic, and place it in a blender or food processor. Then you'll grab your chicken and place that on a cutting board so we can chop that up in a minute. And finally, before you dump anything out, reserve about a cup to a half a cup of the chicken broth that is left in the Instant Pot. For our tamales, we want to be sure to finely chop our chicken. We don't want any big bites or any stringy pieces. Finely dice your chicken using a sharp knife and a cutting board. It should look like this when you're done, so try to get a consistency that resembles this. Then to your blender or food processor, we're going to spice up this sauce a little bit, add in another pinch of salt along with an additional tablespoon of chipotle peppers, and of course your half a cup of reserved chicken stock. I always like to kind of keep a little extra just in case it needs more water for some reason. I usually use a half a cup, but you can always reserve more just to be sure you don't need it. Then blend up the sauce until it's nice and pureed and you don't have any big chunks in it, and you're going to pour it on top of your meat and mix it all together. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're not feeling chicken, you can always change out the filling, especially once you know how to make the base of tamales. You can switch it up for endless kinds of fillings and flavors. So some popular fillings could include red pork, chorizo. For vegetarians, you could do a mix of veggies and cheese. You could also try chicken mole or even adding refried beans. Possibilities are endless and there's hundreds of recipes, so make sure to check out other people's recipes if you're looking for a little change. We've finally arrived at step 4, and this is probably the most fun part where you get to assemble everything. Before we even get to that part, you want to kind of set up your station so you have everything you need within a hand's reach. The things that you will need are your corn husks, and I like to lay mine on a kitchen towel to kind of dry off the excess water since you've probably just drained them. You'll also need your meat filling, and for this recipe we're also going to use some white cheddar cheese, so cut those up into little blocks and you'll want to have that near you as well, along with your masa that we made earlier. Make sure to keep that at room temperature or it won't spread correctly. And then finally, either a putty knife or a tamale spreader, which sounds weird, but we'll get to that in a minute why it's a useful tool. I also like to have a 9x13 dish or some kind of bowl or something that you can prop up your finished tamales so that way none of the juices leak out and they stay nice and clean throughout the process. First things first, grab a corn husk and position it with the wide end pointed down toward you. Using your putty knife or masa spreader or even a wooden spoon, spread about 2 to 3 tablespoons of masa on the corn husk. You'll want to leave about a 2-inch gap on the top, narrow part of the husk, and I'll show you why in a minute. The masa shouldn't be too thick, you just need a thin layer, but enough of a layer that you can't see the bottom of the corn husk through it. Next up, spoon about 2 tablespoons of chicken onto the center of the masa. Place a matchstick of cheese next to the chicken, and then fold both sides of the masa together so it seals the meat and cheese filling inside. Next, wrap the excess corn husk around the tamale. This may vary depending on if you have a big corn husk or maybe a little bit smaller of a corn husk. You might have a little or a lot not to wrap. Then flip the narrow end so nothing will fall out of the tamale. Secure the tamale by tying a thin strip of corn husk around the tamale. And then all you need to do is continue this process until you run out of either masa or chicken. And like I mentioned earlier in the video, tamalada parties are a thing probably because most people want help during this process. It's more fun to do it with a friend or a family member rather than doing this whole work by yourself. Always grab a friend if you need. Finally, step 5, which is the last step before you get to eat your tamales, is steaming them. Once again, I choose to use my Instant Pot for this step. I think it makes it really easy to steam all the tamales. Why not? If you already have it out, why not reuse it? Just make sure that you've cleaned the bowl so that way you are starting with a clean slate. Once again, you're going to grab your steamer trivet and place that at the bottom of the Instant Pot. Then dump in a cup of chicken broth. I like to use new chicken broth and not the stuff that was left over from our chicken, but it's up to you. And then if you have a few corn husks, place those on top of the trivet. From there, you can grab your tamales and make sure to place them upright in the Instant Pot, and you can squeeze as many as possible into the Instant Pot size that you have. I like to kind of prop mine either leaning on the side or leaning on each other, especially if I'm not doing a huge batch. From here, you're going to push the manual pressure cook setting once again and set your timer for 40 minutes. Allow the tamales to steam for the whole time and then vent naturally for another 10 minutes, which means that you don't have to touch anything. From here, you can dish out your tamales and place them either on some plates or a serving platter, and I like to allow mine to sit for about 20 minutes before serving. You know that your tamales are ready when A, they are tender and almost like a little squishy to the touch, and when you unwrap them from the corn husk, they cleanly peel off. Now this is the most fun part, you finally get to eat your tamales, but in the case that you don't eat them all up in one day, here are some tips and tricks on storing. You can store your already steamed tamales in the fridge for about a week, and then just reheat them in the microwave or however you would prefer when you want to eat them again. I like to personally make a huge batch of tamales, double or triple the recipe, so that way I spend all day making them and then I can just pull them out of the freezer later and heat them up as I want to eat them. So if you're like me and you do this, you can place your not steamed tamales in an airtight container. I like to also wrap them with some cling wrap and then put them in bags. Make sure that you label them with the date, and they can be stored in your freezer for up to 3 months. Then once you're ready to pull them out of the freezer and eat them again, you can follow the same instructions as we talked about earlier. And then just another time-saving tip, just in case you Want to make your masa ahead of time, you can actually make it up to 3 days in advance and store it in your refrigerator. Just remember, like I mentioned, to pull it out and allow it to come to room temperature before working with it on your tamales. Well, that's it. You finally know how to make tamales, and I'm excited because once you start to master these skills and you do it over and over again, it becomes a really fun project to do on the weekend or with friends and family. And then of course you can be eating tamales for months on end. For every recipe I do, I also like to link some resources about the history, the culture, or authentic recipes, so that way you guys can learn more about where your food comes from. So make sure to check out those resources in my blog post if you scroll all the way to the bottom. There's lots of cool videos explaining more about the history and the culture behind tamales, and I think you'll find it really interesting. If you have thoughts, opinions, or comments on ways that you and your family make tamales, or have opinions on how to change things up or make things even better, feel free to throw those in the comments below. I always love learning and hearing how everybody cooks in their own house and with their own family. I hope you enjoy making tamales, and I will see you in the next video.